Conditions may apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 13. Get in, loser. We're going shopping. Hitoshi didn't think he'd ever seen Midoriya smile until today. He tried to parse out his mumbles, but they were too incoherent to glean any information from. So he took a peek at his screen. From what he was able to catch while Midoriya read through page after page at the speed of light, it seemed as though he was just looking through criminal law and more stuff about heroics. Why this, of all things, was the first thing to get him to smile was beyond Hitoshi, but seeing Midoriya happy made him happy. They weren't exactly friends, but they had successfully bumbled their way through a few more conversations. He felt confident in saying they had upgraded from painfully awkward to just normal awkward. It was mostly just Hitoshi asking him about what he was researching, which, more often than not, was about heroes. One time, he was looking through radio blueprints, and when Hitoshi asked, he said he was trying to fix one. And then he started talking about circuitry and soldering and a bunch of other stuff that went right over Hitoshi's head. So, yeah, Hitoshi was right about his initial assessment of Midoriya. He was weird, but he was also apparently a genius. He supposed that you can't have the latter without the former. They were kind of a package deal. Feeling more tired than he usually was, he let out a bit of his snark. Midoriya, what about criminal law has you so happy at 6:42 in the morning? He asked flatly. Greeny's head shot up, and his eyes went wide, looking at Hitoshi like a kid who was caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Interesting reaction. Oh, it's nothing. I, uh, I was just, I was right about something. I, uh, I got into a debate with a friend, and I couldn't prove I was right, but I was. He lied. Are your friends all geniuses too? Hitoshi shot back, wondering how and why a kid his age was having debates with his peers that required scholarly backing to win. Midoriya just looked at him confused. What? He responded, looking completely genuine. Well, if you're having debates that you need to have a full bibliography to win, I assume they're geniuses too. Hitoshi elaborated. Greeny was now confused and blushing. Genius? I, I'm not what? Midoriya sputtered out in reply. It was too early in the morning for this. His mom had found out he was sneaking coffee from the library's break room and changed the code on him. Hitoshi was exhausted, so he just stared at Midoriya, blinking slowly for a moment, before deciding this was not a can of worms he wanted to open right now. Whatever you say, Greeny, he replied, turning back to his computer. Izuku needed to be more careful about what he was searching with Shinso around. He was pretty sure that kid had some sort of mind reading quirk because he always knew what Izuku was researching. It would make sense given his mother's quirk. He wanted to ask, but Izuku had long since learned that asking anyone about their quirk usually got the question turned back around on him, and he wasn't going to risk that. He wouldn't say Shinso was his friend, but he was the closest thing Izuku had to one since Kachan, and he didn't want to lose whatever this was. Izuku knew better than to get attached, but somehow, despite everything, it seemed that he couldn't help himself. He couldn't stop the hope bubbling in his chest, and he couldn't take his heart off his sleeve, no matter how many times both of those things were crushed. He hated it. Nothing good ever lasted, and no one knew the whole of Izuku ever loved him. Those were facts that weren't going to change. He should bump up getting Wi-Fi in the warehouse on his list of priorities before the Shinsos found out about him. It was better to be left wondering than waiting around to get his heart broken again. There was no way they were going to keep being so nice to him once they found out what he was. He wanted a good memory to hold on to. He didn't have many of those. He had found a home and a goal. That needed to be enough. Izuku still didn't believe he could ever be a hero. UA was the only school in the country that accepted quirkless applicants to their hero course, and there was just no way he could get in. They had like a 2% acceptance rate last time he checked, and Izuku was not in the top 2% of anything. He still wanted to try, but that was still a couple of years down the line. Izuku wasn't even sure he could make it that long, and he definitely wouldn't make it past opening a rejection letter from UA. No, Izuku had an expiration date, and he knew it. But if he could save people with whatever time he had left, then he would hold on to his delusions as long as he could. Kohaku had barely felt a single emotion coming off that Midoriya kid since she had told him about her quirk. He was always guarded, even before she'd told him. That's how she knew something was off before he had stepped into the library. He was emanating a violent nothingness. It was so odd and nothing like Kohaku had ever felt before. Midoriya was strange and difficult to read at the best of times. That's why she was so surprised to feel a messy spike of emotion from the computer room. It was happiness, but also anger and pride. What an odd combination. It was only there for a moment before he returned to his standard radio silence. Should have to ask Toshi about it later. She was still quite worried about the kid. If Izuku was going to do this, then he needed to have a plan. Ideally, he would have a suit to wear when he went out like heroes did. They wore them for a lot of reasons, after all. A signature suit made them recognizable, so when civilians saw, they would know who to turn to and who was safe. And when villains saw them, they would either turn tail and run or focus their attention on taking the hero down rather than whatever nefarious deed they were doing. A suit could also hide the hero's identity so that they could still carry out normal lives when not on duty. Izuku needed something like that if he was going to do this right. He could sew, but he'd never made a garment from scratch. He'd tailored a few things, made some alterations here and there, and mended holes, but he did not have the skill set required to make a whole outfit. Maybe he could use that money he borrowed to buy something to use as a base to build off of. Should he go out looking for something specific, or should he get something and build the design off of that? Maybe somewhere in the middle. Go out with a vague idea, maybe get whatever he can afford, and then design alterations from there? Yeah, that was starting to sound like a plan. Now he just needed to find where to go to get all the things he would need. Izuku hadn't been to the mall in... Had Izuku ever been to the mall? He can't remember having been to a mall. Izuku had never been to the mall. He would remember this. Why the hell were there so many people at the mall on a Tuesday afternoon? Why was this place so big? Why wasn't it organized in any way that made sense? Completely unrelated stores were just strewn about. Was he just supposed to know where everything is? Izuku's pretty sure this was one of the rings of hell. How was he supposed to find anything here? Picking a random direction, he decided to just go for it. He was looking for clothing stores, preferably men's clothing stores, sportswear specifically. He was hoping to find thermal wear, as it would just generally be helpful, and he could wear it under whatever costume he pulled together. It was frigid outside, and he couldn't stay out long because his limbs got too cold and unresponsive, so thermal wear was a must. Spike shoes as well. He had come too close to falling off the side of a building too many times because of the ice, and shoe spikes should help with that little issue. Next, he wanted some cargo pants that weren't too baggy. Something he could move in but would also hold a lot of gear. Lastly, he needed a jacket, preferably one with a hood so he could hide his hair. He had a mask he could make do with for now, but he had plans to upgrade that in the future. Maybe he could find a visor or glasses that were tinted but didn't affect his night vision. He would get those, but he wasn't holding out too much hope for that. Checklist in mind, Izuku went from store to store, window shopping for a while until he found a place that sold sportswear. Holy crap! New clothes were expensive. He had only ever shopped at thrift stores, and he was starting to see why. Who, in their right mind, spends 10,000 on a pair of joggers? He couldn't even find a clearance rack. Maybe this was a fancy store, and he'd have more luck somewhere else. He was really hoping that was the case. After wandering around the mall for a while, he actually got his hands on a map, and from the looks of it, he had already ruled out one of 3 athletic wear stores in this place, and the other 2 were on complete opposite sides of the mall. Great. Izuku had words for whoever decided malls didn't need to be organized by store type. This was ridiculous. He was ever so slightly closer to one of the 2 options, so he headed there. This store seemed to have a wider range of prices. There were some more 10,000 yens joggers, but there was also a clearance rack, so Izuku made a beeline for that. There was a perfect pair of black cargo pants on sale, but they were a size too big. Maybe he could take them in a bit, or maybe he could just grow into them. Besides that, there was little of note on sale. It was mostly warmer weather clothing, which made sense. Few people needed shorts desperately enough in January to pay full price for them. Begrudgingly, Izuku made his way through the rest of the store. There was a good set of thermal wear, an all-black long-sleeve top and leggings that he could afford. Given the price of everything else he looked at, it looked like a solid average. But what if the clearance section in the other store had a better deal? Gah! It was on the other side of the building. What if it was even more expensive there and he just had to come back? Who designed this place? And people come here for fun? On purpose? It was so crowded and loud and hot. Why was it so hot? He looked around for some shoe spikes, but he couldn't find any, so he just hoped that the other store would have some. Doing his best to keep his annoyance off his face, he went up to buy the cargo pants before he left for the other store. After a solid 5 minutes of weaving his way through crowds, he located the store he was looking for. This one was much bigger than the other 2, so hopefully he would be able to find what he needed. He was walking around looking for the clearance section when he saw it. It was an asymmetric dark green jacket with a zipper going up the right side of the chest. It was lightweight, but not so thin that it looked like it would become threadbare if the wind hit it wrong. The stitching hid several pockets on the sleeves, as well as the body. And it had a hood. It was perfect. And it was 9,000 yen. If he got this, he wouldn't be able to afford the thermal wear and shoe spikes unless he found a hell of a deal here. He grabbed the jacket in his size and headed to the clearance section with his fingers crossed. It seemed like that deal at the other store was the best he was going to get. The pants were 2,500 and the jacket is 9,000. So he only had around 7,000 left, and he still needed to get shoe spikes and treats for DJ. Regardless of the treats, he couldn't afford the whole thermal set if he got the jacket. But he could buy either the leggings or the shirt and have enough left over for the spikes and DJ. That sounded like the best deal he was going to get, so he headed up to the register with the jacket, shoe spikes, and leggings because he figured he could layer under the jacket pretty easily, but putting pants on over pants felt wrong for some reason. After making his purchases, he headed out the door and vowed to never return unless he was held at gunpoint, and maybe not even then. He hid the bags in his backpack and headed back to the red light district. He could stop at the mini mart for DJ's food and check in on Shimamoto-san before going home. Back in his stairwell, Izuku put on his new suit and took a look in the mirror. Knife in hand, he looked downright imposing. The dim light and his hood cast a shadow over his eyes, and the mask covered any other distinguishing features. The pants were only pinned to fit him, so he still had some work to do, but this was a good start. Uptown better get ready.